Well, let's talk to Paul Goldsmith, co-author with Sky's Jason Farrell of How to Lose a Referendum, the definitive story of why the UK voted for Brexit. And I suppose the simple question is this speech today basically in line with what Mrs Thatcher said in Bruges 30 years ago?
I think it definitely is. One of the mistakes people make about the Bruges speech is they think it was an anti-Europe speech. It wasn't. It was actually a pro-Europe speech. It talked about all the benefits of cooperation, about the shared history that people have, and the fact that they could cooperate in the future. But what she was responding to was the fact that what was a common market was turning into a common government. And what she didn't want to have was it being too centralised. And she actually said something that's quite prescient. She said, if it becomes over-regulated and too much happens from the centre, it will be damaging to the EU. And look where we are now.
Francis Maude, I mean, you were around there, no? So was I.
Minor contributions to the speech, in fact.
Do you think that that was the moment where really Britain started heading out of the European Union?
I think what she did was articulate in a very clear way that there was a different vision of how Europe should be. I think the big moment where it went wrong, actually, was after not the Maastricht Treaty itself, which my friends often remind me I was a signatory to, but after that, because actually what Maastricht could have been is a model for a different kind of European Union, with different countries participating in different things to different extents. But as soon as the ink was dry on the Maastricht Treaty, we then had the Nordic countries joining, and they were told there's only one way to join. It's one size fits all. Then the Baltics, then the Central Eastern Europeans, and all told, you've got to sign up to the whole package. And so that whole concept that Maastricht could have been a step towards of having something much more flexible, much more variegated, with different degrees of participation, what we used to call in those days variable geometry, that sadly went out of the window.
Well, if I can support what Lord Maude is saying, Maastricht could have been a two-destination Europe, in the architecture set up to support could have supported both countries in the Euro and countries without. Instead, it's a two-speed Europe. Britain were part of the slow lane, and so it might be better for them to come out, which is where we're going now.
I mean, it does seem to me, irrespective of the result of the referendum, that what Mr Juncker laid out as his vision for Europe in Strasbourg last week would always have been unacceptable to Britain.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. And you know, there's a sense in which, so far as the Eurozone is concerned, he's right. We always have said that you can't really have a single currency area without a pretty strong political union underpinning it, with a fiscal union, you know, common debt and all of those things, because otherwise you have too many tensions, as we've seen, built into it. So he's right about that, but he's going back to that old thing of saying to all of the non-Eurozone countries in the EU, you've got to shape up and join in everything, or you're not part of the club. And that's the wrong way. It's just the wrong, rigid thinking.
So we would have ended up on the fringes even if we'd voted to remain?
Yes, we would have probably done in the end, unless Europe was changed into a two-destination Europe, which Gisela Stewart, chairman of the Vote Leave campaign, did say that if David Cameron had come back with that from Brussels, she might have campaigned to remain.
And my only difference with that is I would say it wouldn't need to be a two-destination, it should be multi-destination. There should be lots of different ways for countries to participate.
Yes.
And of course, the advantage of that, had we negotiated to be on the outside from within, if you like, or on the outer rim from within, is that these trade matters wouldn't have come up, and nor would the border issues.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yep.
But now this has become about freedom of movement, which is
well,
much more
again,
difficult.
I wouldn't take the freedom of movement thing as being an absolute given for all time. The concept of unrestricted freedom of movement is under pressure from within the European Union anyway. All the problems you've seen with migration over this last period have raised all those issues. And so I wouldn't assume that for all time free movement, unrestrained free movement is going to be there. And indeed in the Norway option, the EEA option, it doesn't require absolutely unrestricted free movement.
And Francis has also hasn't said the point about what Maastricht did. It changed the European community, the name, which is about cooperation, to European Union, which is about integration. And that was a significant point in what happened to this country.
Well, I don't know, you got the Mothers' Union, and that's not exactly a sort of...
but also, the Treaty of Rome had the concept of ever closer union embedded in it from the very outset.
But on that point about freedom of movement, I mean, that has now become a real obstacle to reaching a constructive deal, hasn't it?
It has become an obstacle because people are saying you can't have single markets and without freedom of movement. In the end,
Which of
what
course
I think,
you can. It's a completely nonsense thing.
as long as we implement the rules and laws that we're supposed to implement, which is what Tony Blair was talking about the other time, I think what Theresa May is going to look to do is talk about how we can have this shared future with each other and work together. And it's interesting she's doing it in the same church where Galileo was first accused of looking at the world differently.
Quite a nice aftershave as well. What about the Florence speech? Is that, do you think, going to go down history books like the Bruges speech?
Possibly, because it is going to shape a new era of cooperation, which is what some of the Brexit campaign were looking for, cooperation in trade and other areas. It's why it's significant. It's in Florence, which 500 years ago sort of started off this idea of trade and working with each other, cooperating and competing. So it could be very significant, but it could also be significant because of what happens afterwards within her internal party. This isn't just about European management, it's about party management too.
What do you reckon? Historic milestone today?
Well, I think it'll be a step on a negotiation, and it'll hopefully revive the negotiation, which I don't think, I mean, all the talk about the negotiation breaking down was nonsense. Of course they hadn't broken down. It's just there's sometimes in a long negotiation, there's a standoff. There was a bit of a standoff, no great drama.
Although Barnier is delivering what he thinks of what the 27 states want. So she's peeling over the heads of him to the 27 states. That could be good.
OK, thank you both very much indeed.